In a small Kentucky town, a young boy vanished without a trace. No one knew how it could have happened. But within hours, the boy's entire family was frantically searching for him. The few leads in the case quickly turned cold, and the FBI was called in to expose the kidnapper and find the missing child.
On the day before Thanksgiving, a mother discovered her 10-year-old son was missing from his school. When a child of separated parents disappears, investigators first look at the family, and divorced parents often suspect each other. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The search by the FBI and local authorities would cover 1,000 miles. They were determined to find the boy and his abductor.
London, Kentucky is a quiet, rural town surrounded by rolling hills in the heart of Kentucky's tobacco country. It is a traditional town where many farming families have lived for generations, and most of the people know and trust each other. At 11 a.m. on the day before Thanksgiving, November 25th, 1992, the children of Paces Creek Elementary School were looking forward to a special holiday luncheon before they left for the long weekend.
Keep up the good work. What are we doing over here? Oh, we've got the glue going. Where's Scotty? Oh, we're doing a turkey in the hand.
10-year-old Scotty Baker was especially excited. After school, he was to stay at his grandmother's house until his father picked him up on Thanksgiving morning. Scotty planned to spend the entire weekend traveling alone with his father on a long-haul trucking run. Since his parents were divorced, Scotty relished the time he spent with his father and loved to ride in the trucks his dad drove for a living. Following an afternoon tutoring session, Scotty was scheduled to go home on the bus at 3 p.m. to his grandmother's house. For Scotty's mother, Ruth, it would be the first Thanksgiving her youngest child was away from her. She and her daughter decided to surprise Scotty and pick him up before he got on the bus. The single mother only had what remained of the day to see her son before he left on the trip with his father the next morning. Ruth waited in the car while her daughter went in to fetch Scotty.
I picked Scotty up at school that day instead of having him ride the bus to his grandmother's house because he was going to be gone with his father the full Thanksgiving weekend. And I just wanted to see him before he left.
Do you guys know where Scotty is?
Scotty's sister asked some of his classmates if they'd seen him, but they hadn't.
Excuse me. Do you know where Scotty is?
His teacher said that he had not shown up for his scheduled after-school tutoring, but figured he had skipped it to start his long weekend.
Have a happy Thanksgiving. You too.
Where's Scotty?
I don't know. I looked outside for him and no one's seen him. I asked the teacher.
Ruth hadn't called ahead, so she thought Scotty had probably taken the bus as previously planned.
Let's go to Grandma.
I just thought there was some sort of a misunderstanding as to, you know, whether he was supposed to stay that day. I thought he just rode the bus back to his grandmother's house, and somewhere we had just missed him.
Scotty's grandmother lived close by, so the boy would certainly be there by now.
I'll go upstairs and check for him.
Great, thanks. Dorothy!
Have you seen
But Scotty's grandmother had not seen him get off the bus that day.
No, I took him to school and dropped him off at school.
Ruth called his friend's parents in the neighborhood,
This is Scotty's mom.
but none of their children had seen Scotty either.
Okay, thank you.
When we searched the neighborhood and realized that he didn't go home with any of the kids, we went back to school. to try to find out if maybe he'd stayed there for some reason, missed the bus, or at that point we didn't know what to think. Scotty had never got on a bus and went home with another child or went anywhere without telling either myself or his grandmother.
Ruth found the principal in the main office and asked for his help to locate her son. By this time, the teachers had all gone home for the holiday weekend. The principal told her he would try to contact Scotty's teachers at home. Then Ruth made an alarming discovery. She saw that Scotty had been signed out at 11:20 that day.
The sign-out book was just laying there on the desk, and I just happened to look down and see it, and see his name on it. And it said Scotty Baker had been signed out by Patricia Smith.
Ruth recognized the name. Scotty's father had a cousin named Patricia Smith that Ruth had met once years before. It was strange that the cousin would have picked up Scotty without telling anyone in the immediate family, since she wasn't authorized. The principal called the school secretary to find out more. He reached her at a hospital where she was visiting a sick relative. The principal asked if she had released Scotty to a woman named Patricia Smith 6 hours earlier. She confirmed that she had. The secretary recalled that Patricia Smith, a dark-haired woman with glasses, walked into the office at about 11:15 a.m. The young woman said she was Scotty's cousin and was picking him up to take him to his father. When Scotty's 5th grade class passed by the front office on their way to the Thanksgiving luncheon, the secretary summoned Scotty with exciting news.
Your cousin's here. You can go, Bobby.
His cousin had come to take him early from school. The secretary knew most of the children's parents and relatives, but she had never met Patricia Smith before. She added that Scotty didn't seem afraid of the woman and he left willingly. The principal conveyed the news to Ruth. She was upset to learn that Scotty had been released to another person without her permission.
She was taking him to see his father. So that kind of made sense to me. Because if Donnie was out on the road and he was just going to swing in, he might have had somebody pick him up, but it was strange to me why it would be somebody that Scotty didn't know.
Apparently knew each other, and Scotty was...
Ruth didn't know Patricia Smith either, nor did she know her number.
No, and she didn't because...
She demanded that the principal call the authorities. Kentucky State Police sent 2 troopers to the school to help track down the missing juvenile. The principal handed officers a school photograph of Scotty Baker and provided them with the names and addresses of his 5th grade classmates.
You didn't give her permission in any way, shape, or form.
Ruth told officers that her son was last seen 6 hours earlier, leaving school with a woman named Patricia Smith. Though her ex-husband, Donnie, had a relative by that name, Ruth could not provide them with her address or phone number. Investigators' first task was to locate the cousin. Former Kentucky State Police Detective Larry Lewis discovered that Donnie Baker's cousin, Patty Smith, lived very close to the school, as Ruth had remembered.
We went to Patty Smith, that was related to Donnie, a cousin, and talked to her, and she didn't fit the description whatsoever. And her alibi checked out where she was at.
Into the evening, police pursued all the women named Patricia Smith within a 100-mile radius of Scotty's school. They found several. All were home, since the next day was Thanksgiving. But none looked like the woman described by the school secretary, and all had solid alibis.
Can people vouch for this?
There was about 3 or 4 other Patricia Smiths that we checked out, and none of them panned out. So we eventually found out that it wasn't a Patricia Smith, that somebody had used that for an alias.
At Scotty's grandmother's house, Ruth and her two daughters braced themselves for the worst.
It's not good.
Almost 8 hours after Scotty was taken from school by an unidentified woman, there was still no word. Ruth tried to reach her ex-husband, Donnie, to see if he might know something. She left a message with his manager at the trucking company, who told her that Donnie was somewhere on the highway delivering a load of freight to Ottawa, Illinois.
Listen, if it wasn't important, I
We
wouldn't be
waited
home.
for him to call because for some reason I thought he'd know where he was when he got there. That was the only hope that we had at that point, that somehow Donnie would know who had him when he found out that he was gone.
Kentucky State Police continued to search for answers locally. They traveled to the homes of the children that had attended school with the missing boy that day.
About the last time that you saw
One of Scotty's friends had spent most of that day with him.
We were walking down
He recalled seeing Scotty leave with the young woman.
Did Scotty seem afraid of her?
The 10-year-old also saw the car they got into. He knew it had 4 doors, but he was unsure of the model. The boy remembered clearly that Scotty was happy about leaving and showed no fear of her.
Did you note her hair color?
He said that all Scotty had talked about that day was traveling on the road alone with his father.
The other person in the car?
The 5th grader had little else to
Anything
add.
else comes up, please give us a call. If you think of anything else, let her know.
By 10 p.m., more than 10 hours after Scotty was last seen, investigators still had no solid leads to his whereabouts. Since they'd received no ransom calls, police now turned their attention to Scotty's family and friends.
Hello?
Scotty's stepmother, Stephanie Baker, stayed by the phone. Perhaps someone who was close to the boy knew more than they were telling. In child abduction cases, it is usually one of the parents who is responsible, since they have greatest access to the child. Scotty's mother, Ruth, understood this and was willing to provide investigators with whatever they needed to find her son.
Of course, any law enforcement official, I think that's their first thought, that the mother and father have something to do with it when a child disappears. I think that's the first people they investigate. And in this case, they immediately thought Donnie or I had something to do with it, simply because we were divorced.
Detectives asked about her relationship with her ex-husband, Donnie.
Every time he would go over there, he would always come home complaining.
She said that she and Donnie were distant, but for Scotty's sake, they remained generally respectful of each other. The couple had divorced 5 years prior. According to Ruth, the divorce was acrimonious, with custody of their son acting as the main point of contention.
Saturday to see my son.
Why now?
After some wrangling,
Why now?
Ruth and Donnie agreed to joint custody.
If Christmas comes on a
To her
Tuesday,
knowledge,
I'm not waiting
when her
Saturday.
ex-husband had Scotty on the weekends, he always treated their son well. In fact, Ruth believed if there was anyone who might harm her boy, it was Stephanie, her ex-husband's new wife of 9 months.
Thanks.
Ruth claimed that Stephanie was jealous of Scotty's closeness with his father.
I didn't know Stephanie very well. What I knew about her really was from Scotty, and at this point Scotty wasn't telling me a whole lot about her. I knew that he didn't want to go to their house anymore, and I knew that he didn't want to be around Stephanie much, but I thought it was just the feelings that he was picking up, the feelings of jealousy that he was picking up from her.
Investigators thought that Ruth might also be jealous of Donnie's new wife as well, for the time that Stephanie and Scotty's father had been spending with the 10-year-old. With mixed motives and emotions, Detective Lewis believed at least one of Scotty's guardians was likely responsible for the boy's disappearance.
There were several suspects from the beginning. Stephanie Baker, because she was the stepmother, Donnie Baker, because he was the father, and Ruth Baker, because she was the mother. There was a conflict between Ruth and Stephanie, so those three were the main suspects.
By midnight, November 26th, Scotty had been missing for over 12 hours. Scotty's father, Donnie Baker, was returning from Illinois where he had learned of his son's disappearance. He had dropped off his rig and hitched a ride back to London, Kentucky with a friend. Donnie's wife, Stephanie, and her father were waiting at a truck stop to pick him up. They didn't have the good news Donnie had hoped for. Everyone was tired, but Donnie insisted on heading out to search for Scotty. He and Stephanie drove to some nearby woods where Donnie and Scotty had often hunted and shot at targets together. But they found no sign of his missing son.
Scotty!
With dawn approaching, Stephanie pleaded with Donnie to give up for the night and head home. He finally relented. Early on Thanksgiving morning, Donnie and his ex-wife Ruth set out to distribute flyers with Scotty's photo. With their 10-year-old son now missing for almost 24 hours, tension got the better of them. They accused each other of taking Scotty and hiding him. Despite their mutual suspicions, Donnie and Ruth continued canvassing the area.
In the window. I guess it
Thank you, thank you.
They posted flyers in every business that was open on Thanksgiving. On a day meant for family, they received no reports of sightings of their missing son. They could only hope that Scotty was still alive. On Thanksgiving Day, 1992, Kentucky State Police still had no leads to the whereabouts of 10-year-old Scotty Baker. The boy had been taken from school the day before by a young woman who claimed to be his father's cousin. Scotty's father, Donnie, a truck driver who had recently remarried, was on the road when his son disappeared. Police arrived at his home to interview him and his new wife of 9 months, Stephanie Baker. Investigators suspected that perhaps someone close to the missing boy knew more than they were saying. The officer told the couple that he needed to interview them separately. He didn't want either of them to influence the other's responses.
Scotty?
Donnie Baker appeared anxious, but assured the officer he'd cooperate in any way that he could.
Excellent ball player. No, I did not.
He confirmed that he planned to pick up Scotty on Thanksgiving morning after delivering a truckload of cargo to Illinois the previous evening. He and his son were going to be traveling alone to Tennessee and back. Donnie added that he didn't ask his cousin Patricia Smith or anyone else to pick up Scotty from school the day before. Stephanie told the trooper that the morning that Scotty was taken, she was at home doing laundry with her friend Suzanne. Stephanie suspected that Donnie's first wife, Ruth, was probably hiding Scotty somewhere.
not really any problems.
She believed that Ruth was jealous of her marriage to Donnie, and that her husband's ex-wife would try something drastic to win him back.
Okay, yeah, she had a fuller.
Detectives also interviewed the secretary from Scotty's school, the only witness who had stood face-to-face with Scotty's unknown abductor.
Very big shoulders. Her hair color.
She was shown photographs of all the women in the family, including Scotty's mother, Ruth, and his stepmother, Stephanie. Even if they had worn a disguise, the secretary was sure that none of them could be the young woman with the dark hair and glasses who had taken Scotty from school the previous morning. After more than 24 hours of searching, the safe recovery of the 10-year-old was becoming less likely. Former Kentucky State Police Detective Larry Lewis decided to use polygraph examinations to help eliminate the immediate family members.
Polygraphs are, to me, they are just an aid. I don't trust the polygraph 100%, but it can help you.
Is your first name Ruth?
Scotty's mother, Ruth, was tested first.
Do you know for sure where Scotty is right now?
No, sir.
She also provided a handwriting sample to compare to the signature of the woman who signed Scotty out of school.
For the year 2000.
Her handwriting did not match the suspect's. And the results of Ruth's polygraph exam showed no signs of deception.
I was cleared first as a suspect. I took a lie detector test and had no problem. The detective, told me I passed it with flying colors, so they immediately cleared me.
Ruth's ex-husband, Donnie, was also called in for testing. Though police confirmed he was out of state at the time of Scotty's disappearance, they could not rule out his possible involvement. The results of Donnie's exam were inconclusive and revealed possible deception. They hoped his young wife, Stephanie, could provide answers, but they hit an obstacle, as Detective Larry Lewis explains.
Stephanie was asked to take a polygraph, but she was pregnant at the time, is what she told me. And the state police will not give anybody that's pregnant a polygraph. That's their policy. So when she told me that, I didn't know if she was lying to me or not, so I sent her to the hospital. And I had her tested, and it was determined that she was pregnant.
Stephanie did provide a handwriting sample. But like Ruth's, it appeared not to match the signature of the woman who signed out Scotty.
I woke up. It's around 8:30.
Stephanie also gave a detailed account of her activities on the previous day. She maintained that she spent the morning at home doing laundry with her friend Suzanne. It took them several hours, and they passed some of the time on the phone with another friend. By the early afternoon, they had finished their wash and planned to head back to Suzanne's house. That's when Suzanne realized she had lost her keys and feared she had locked them in the trunk.
Are you kidding me?
So we decided to call.
Stephanie called several locksmiths, but found none that were immediately available. So Suzanne called her mother, who came to pick her up.
Suzanne had a spare key at her mother's around 8:30.
Stephanie gave investigators Suzanne's address so they could corroborate the story.
My friend Suzanne
Late on Thanksgiving night, investigators found Stephanie's friend Suzanne at home at her apartment. She was relaxing with her husband, a trucker who was home for the holiday weekend. The detective asked her where she was on the morning that Scotty Baker disappeared. Suzanne confirmed that she did laundry all morning at Stephanie's house. Suzanne also said that at about 11 a.m., Stephanie spoke to a mutual friend about making plans for all of them to get together sometime over the long weekend. But after they found out Scotty was missing, no one was in the mood to go out.
We don't know.
Suzanne told pretty much the same story as Stephanie, that she was over at Stephanie's house and that they was washing clothes and that they received a phone call and that she locked her keys up in the car and that her mother had come over and picked her up.
we left, went out.
Suzanne provided police with the friend's number, who later confirmed the call. The detective asked her to call them if she remembered anything else. As snow dusted London, Kentucky on Thanksgiving night, Scotty was still nowhere to be found.
I think we had the first snow that week, and I remember standing in the window at the edge of dark thinking that my baby is out there somewhere and it's snowing and he's probably cold because whoever's got him, he's probably not giving him anything to put on. He doesn't have any clean clothes and he's not took a bath, and I don't even know if they're giving him anything to eat. And that was, I think, the saddest snowfall that I ever saw in my entire life.
On Friday, November 27th, 1992, Kentucky State Police called on the FBI for help. Special Agent Rod Kincaid from the FBI's London, Kentucky office learned that it had been 2 days since Scotty had been missing.
Our immediate concern was for his safety and to see that the boy would be returned home with his family. The longer an investigation goes on, the longer the child is missing, there's more chance for the child to meet with foul play. And if it is a kidnapping, there's more danger that the child will be harmed.
By now, Scotty could be anywhere. And investigators hoped there was still enough time to rescue the 5th grader from his unknown abductor. On November 27th, 1992, the day after Thanksgiving, the small town of London, Kentucky was still reeling from the disappearance of 10-year-old Scotty Baker, who had now been missing for 2 days. Since the 5th grader was last seen with a woman who claimed to be a relative, FBI Special Agent Rod Kincaid, along with local detectives, looked to Scotty's family for answers.
Our investigation basically was looking at the close family members who might have access to Scotty, who Scotty would go with willingly, because it had been reported that he left the school in a rather pleasant way. He did not appear to be frightened of the person who took him from the school.
Mrs. Baker.
Investigators again met with Scotty's single mother, Ruth. She had hardly slept since Scotty went missing and confirmed that she had not yet received any ransom demands. Ruth maintained that she believed her ex-husband Donnie and his 21-year-old wife Stephanie probably knew more than they were saying. She didn't trust his new young wife. Ruth claimed that she and Stephanie had never spent time together socially and only ran into each other in the small town stores. Even then, Ruth didn't speak to her since Stephanie always acted jealous and immature, seemingly mocking Ruth from a distance with her friend Suzanne. Ruth recalled that Stephanie had also harassed her children. Just a week before Scotty went missing, Stephanie had followed Ruth's daughter and Scotty as they were heading home. Scotty felt that Stephanie despised him for visiting her new husband Donnie so often. Stephanie appeared threatened by the boy's close relationship with his father. Ruth said that Scotty didn't like seeing his father if Stephanie was going to be there.
Ruth was a very concerned mother. I received a very good impression from Ruth Baker. I certainly did not suspect Ruth of being involved with the disappearance of Scotty. She was acting just like a concerned mother should act.
How are you?
Good.
At the FBI office in London, Kentucky, agents asked Scotty's father, Donnie, to come in for a second polygraph exam since he had failed the first time. He passed this one, showing no signs of deception. Donnie now confided that, like Ruth, he too had become suspicious of his new wife, Stephanie, according to former Detective Larry Lewis.
Donnie is a very laid-back person. He doesn't get upset really easy. He was very helpful, though, after we finally got him talking. He started saying Stephanie did have some problems with his son, Scotty.
The relationship between Stephanie, Donnie, and Scotty had become strained. Just before Donnie left on his most recent trip, Stephanie became angry when he wasn't thrilled by the news that she was pregnant.
And then when you come home on the weekend,
She was convinced that it was because Donnie was so close with Scotty. Stephanie complained that Donnie spent more time with his son than with her. Since Donnie was on the road so much, his time at home was limited, and to Stephanie, it seemed that Scotty always had priority. Donnie found Stephanie's diary and gave it to investigators as evidence. They found several passages that were disturbing.
I recall seeing in the diary words like, Donnie loved Scotty more than me. I hate Donnie, or I hate Scotty. And there were words like, I wish Scotty was gone. I wish something would happen to him. There were a lot of indications in that diary that she resented Scotty and that she hated Scotty.
Agents called Stephanie in to take a polygraph exam. Unlike the state of Kentucky, FBI policy does not exempt pregnant women from the test.
Now, Stephanie, did you ever...
When the examiner asked if she knew what happened to Scotty, her response indicated deception. Following the exam, Stephanie was held for further questioning. Armed with the information from her diary and her failed polygraph exam, investigators pressed Stephanie on the details of her alibi, but she held firm. She repeated her claim that on November 25th, the day Scotty disappeared from school, she was at home with her friend Suzanne doing laundry the entire day. Stephanie also mentioned the phone conversation she had with a second friend starting at 11 a.m., corroborating Suzanne's version of events.
Hey, what's up?
The timing of the phone call was critical, since Scotty was taken at 11:20 a.m. But agents could not confirm the call with phone records since it was a holiday weekend and phone company personnel would not be back in the office until Monday morning. To agents, Stephanie's demeanor struck them as odd since she appeared unfazed that her stepson had now been missing for 2.5 days.
One thing that I recall is how cold Stephanie was when she discussed her stepson, Scotty Baker. I recall that she was certainly not the least bit, or did not appear to be concerned with the disappearance of Scotty. Even though she used the words that she was concerned, her demeanor, her expressions conveyed to me that she really wasn't that concerned.
Stephanie provided a second handwriting sample for the FBI to compare to the one left at the school by Scotty's abductor. Investigators confirmed that the signatures did not match. Though they felt certain that Stephanie was lying about her knowledge of Scotty's whereabouts, she was definitely not the woman who had removed Scotty from school. Stephanie's alibi hinged on the statements of her friend Suzanne. On Monday, November 30th, investigators returned to the friend's apartment to re-question her and ask her to come in for a polygraph. But Suzanne was not at home. By November 30th, 1992, 5 days had passed since 10-year-old Scotty Baker was taken from his school near London, Kentucky by an unknown woman.
It's never just us. Scotty is
The FBI and Kentucky state detectives believed Scotty's stepmother, Stephanie, was somehow involved since she was found to be deceptive on her polygraph exam. Stephanie claimed to be doing laundry with her friend Suzanne on the day Scotty went missing. Though Suzanne corroborated Stephanie's story, former Kentucky State Detective Larry Lewis doubted Suzanne's credibility.
Suzanne and Stephanie seemed like to me that they had their stories down to pat, and they were telling the same story. They were telling the same times. It put a lot of question in my mind that how they could have their stories down, and they were so alike, even on their times. So we were narrowing our investigation down to Suzanne and Stephanie.
Agents wanted to confirm the story by polygraphing Suzanne, but Suzanne was nowhere to be found. Investigators called on her mother to ask if she knew where Suzanne might be. She said her daughter had left for Florida with her husband, a truck driver who was scheduled to make a delivery.
Something wrong?
Yeah. Have you seen this?
The mother didn't know when they would be back. An FBI agent went to the Kentucky trucking firm where Suzanne's husband was employed. The foreman confirmed that the trucker was on the road, scheduled to arrive in Pompano Beach, Florida the following morning, December 1st, 1992. He did not know which routes the driver had taken and could not confirm if the trucker's wife, Suzanne, or the missing 10-year-old boy was with him.
No, I didn't see him leave with anybody.
With the truck out of CB range of the company, investigators had no way to reach the trucker on the road. Kentucky investigators turned to FBI Special Agent Roger Ramirez in the Miami field office for help.
Our goal is to be able to quickly resolve the situation with the discovery of the child alive. When this information came to us, we were hopeful that it was going to be the case, and hopefully that this little boy, Scotty, would be in the custody of this couple.
He's coming.
Since the truck's specific route was unknown, it would be next to impossible for agents or police to locate the rig as evening approached.
We don't want to put the kid in danger because he's got perishable.
12 hours remained until its scheduled arrival in South Florida.
He could take 75, he could take 95.
Agents planned to be there when the semi pulled in. Until then, they held out hope that somewhere out on the highway, there was a truck with Scotty Baker on board, speeding toward Florida.
The only information we had received was that they were en route from London, Kentucky to Pompano Beach. The Miami division was not advised of any other stops a vehicle might be making. However, with a sealed load, we assumed it would be coming directly to the Pompano Beach warehouse.
At 7 a.m. on December 1st, 1992, FBI agents arrived at the warehouse as planned, a half hour before the 18-wheeler's scheduled arrival. But it appeared the truck they were looking for had already arrived.
Don't see anybody.
A license plate check confirmed it. Though the door was open, they saw no sign of the driver, his wife Suzanne, or the missing 10-year-old boy.
Hey! Go!
Then Suzanne's husband stepped out from behind the truck and asked what they were doing around his rig.
We advised him that we wanted to speak to his wife. He indicated to us that she was sleeping in the cab. We also requested permission to search the vehicle for the young boy. He granted both willingly.
The child was not there. But Suzanne was. She climbed out, still groggy from sleeping. Suzanne said she didn't understand why they wanted to talk to her. She had already been interviewed about the case back in Kentucky. Agreeing to cooperate, Suzanne assured them she'd answer any questions they may still have. Agents told her husband that they also needed to search inside the trailer. The trucker was unwilling to break the seal on the trailer door. If it were broken, his client could refuse the goods. Agents photographed the seal to protect the delivery requirements.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Satisfied, the trucker raised the door. In the sparsely loaded semi, an agent searched for any trace of the missing boy, while Detective Lewis waited in Kentucky for word.
In my heart, I knew after about 24 hours that more than likely foul play had been committed. But I was still hoping at that time that he would be in the truck, but it proved out that he wasn't.
The Florida agent asked Suzanne to tell him everything she knew about her friend Stephanie's 10-year-old stepson, Scotty. Suzanne said she knew nothing and claimed that she had never even met the boy. She agreed to return to the office so they could fingerprint and photograph her. Her husband needed to stay at the warehouse with his truck. Agents in Florida received further instructions from Agent Rod Kincaid in Kentucky.
I asked them to conduct a polygraphic examination of Suzanne to test her veracity concerning her recollection of the events, and to obtain handwriting exemplars from Suzanne and have her write wording similar to that used in the sign-out log. especially the words Patricia Smith.
At the field office in Miami, Suzanne was photographed, fingerprinted, and polygraphed as requested. Suzanne was found to be deceptive on her alibi during Scotty Baker's disappearance.
Anyone to cause Scotty's disappearance.
And though she had denied it, the test also revealed that she likely knew where he was now. As Suzanne provided agents with a writing sample, they informed her that the results of her polygraph suggested deception.
So,
But she remained steadfast in her denial.
If I could come over and do my laundry, and she said fine.
Like her friend Stephanie, Suzanne could not be arrested on the basis of a failed
Which
polygraph.
took us all afternoon.
And unless her signature matched the suspects, agents would be forced to release her. On December 1st, 1992, 6 days after 10-year-old Scotty Baker was taken from his school in London, Kentucky, FBI agents had searched a truck in South Florida where they believed the boy may have been hidden. Scotty was not there, but his stepmother's friend, Suzanne, was. Though she and Stephanie were close, Suzanne claimed she had never met Scotty, according to FBI Special Agent Roger Ramirez.
Suzanne denied any knowledge and or involvement in the disappearance of Scott Baker. She indicated she'd never even seen the child in person and only seen him in photographs.
Suzanne accompanied agents to the Miami FBI field office, where she provided a writing sample to compare to the one left by Scotty's abductor. She had also consented to take a polygraph exam, and it had revealed possible deception. In spite of the results, the 22-year-old continued to insist that she and her friend Stephanie Baker had no involvement in the abduction of Stephanie's stepson, Scotty.
At the Miami field office, she gave basically a similar account, initially denying any involvement in her knowledge. However, we as investigators felt that there was something missing and there was something that she was not telling us.
Help to find that young boy.
After an hour of questioning, Suzanne finally broke. She may have realized that it was only a matter of time until the FBI positively matched her signature to the woman's that had removed Scotty from school 6 days earlier. Suzanne admitted that she had portrayed herself as Patricia Smith, acting as if she was the boy's distant relative. She claimed that Scotty's pregnant stepmother, Stephanie, had convinced her to sign him out. Suzanne said Stephanie wanted to get back at her husband.
I didn't know that any of this was going to happen.
Suzanne informed us they took Scotty out of school to scare him. Stephanie was jealous of the relationship that the child had with its father, Donnie Baker. Stephanie was pregnant with Donnie's child at the time, and she was jealous of the relationship.
I need to talk to you.
Stephanie Baker's plan was to scare him to keep him from going to visit his father.
Stephanie arrived at Suzanne's apartment the day before Thanksgiving, November 25th at 9:30 a.m.
I need you to trust me.
She had had a fight with her husband, Donnie, and wanted Suzanne's help to get even.
Maybe we could go to a school.
At first, Suzanne was reluctant to get involved, but Stephanie was insistent, pleading with her to help as a friend.
I don't know, just please help me. You're my best friend, please.
Suzanne eventually agreed.
Suzanne donned a disguise which would have facilitated her removing the child. Stephanie also provided her the name of this relative to sign on the dismissal form.
Scotty had never met his father's cousin, Patricia Smith, nor Suzanne. Stephanie figured the boy would go willingly when the disguised woman told Scotty she was taking him to see his father. Suzanne confirmed that they spent the rest of the morning at Stephanie's until Suzanne drove her to Scotty's school at about 11 a.m. Stephanie hid in the back seat as Suzanne retrieved Scotty from the school's secretary. Suzanne claimed that at the time, she didn't realize the child would never see his school or his parents again. Suzanne said she headed north out of London, Kentucky. Scotty told her how excited he was to go on the road trip with his father for the entire weekend.
The truck?
Once the child was inside of the vehicle with them, Stephanie, who was seated in the back, reaches, starts choking the child in the front seat, and then pulls him into the back seat. Suzanne begged her to stop. However, as she put it, Stephanie freaked out.
Scotty fought for his life, kicking and screaming. But his 21-year-old stepmother was too strong. In moments, the boy was dead. Suzanne simply continued to drive.
She didn't know what to do. Stephanie at this point says that she would blame her because Suzanne was the one who checked the child out of school. As a result, Suzanne basically felt she had no choice other than to agree to help dispose of the body.
The women drove to an abandoned strip mine nearby. They searched for a spot to hide the body away from the road.
Where are we going? Up here.
Suzanne said a few hours later, they returned with gasoline to burn the corpse before burying it. Investigators needed to know where the body could be found. Agents asked Suzanne for specific directions.
So I provided her a pen and piece of paper for her to draw the exact location as to where the body had been placed. Suzanne then drew a very detailed map as to where the body of Donald Scott Baker could be located in the London, Kentucky area.
On the afternoon of December 1st, 1992, 6 days after 10-year-old Scotty Baker was abducted on Thanksgiving Eve, authorities retrieved the boy's charred remains. His stepmother, Stephanie Baker, after repeated denials, eventually confessed to the murder and was arrested. Residents were shocked that a pregnant woman could have done this to a child. Investigators working the case, including Special Agent Rod Kincaid, were deeply affected by the harsh reality of Scotty's murder.
This is one of the cases I had as an FBI agent that certainly I'll never forget. It was horrible that a 10-year-old boy would be taken from a school and murdered. FBI agents have families. I have 2 sons. It was a horrible case. I feel very badly for the parents because I know they cared about their son.
Stephanie's accomplice and friend, Suzanne, was prosecuted first. Because of intense media coverage, her trial was moved to another county. Commonwealth attorney for the 27th Judicial Circuit in Kentucky, Tom Handy, convinced the jury that Suzanne was guilty of reckless homicide, kidnapping, and abusing a corpse.
How she could drive a vehicle with this child being strangled immediately next to her, touching her, is unbelievable to me. She drove that vehicle for 5 minutes while little Scotty was being strangled to death. A terrible time. Her vehicle has dents and marks on the dashboard caused by this child kicking it during his death.
Suzanne received a sentence of 25 years for her crimes. Facing the death penalty, 21-year-old Stephanie Baker pled guilty to murder and received a life sentence. 7 months after entering prison, Stephanie gave birth to a baby boy. Her parents are raising the child, and her husband, Donnie, divorced her. 10 years after the tragedy, Scotty's mother, Ruth Baker, has managed to press forward in the face of her devastating loss.
It's hard to say what your life would have been like, if he had lived. I think that it's made me a better parent to my other 2 children and my grandchildren because I'm very protective of them.
Ruth Baker visits Scotty's gravesite often. As a result of her son's case, state legislation was passed in Kentucky requiring photo identification for any person signing a child out of school. The Bakers hope that through the loss of Scotty, other families may avoid the pain they've suffered. On a bright summer day, an unimaginable crime horrified California. A young girl was snatched from her neighborhood by an unknown assailant. Hundreds of officials and volunteers combed acres of farmland searching for the missing girl. The FBI soon joined the hunt, hoping that a quick response would improve the odds of finding her before her young life was extinguished.
On July 2nd, 1994, a 12-year-old girl was abducted from her home in Northern California. Based on experience, the FBI had learned the hard lessons. Act fast, search wide, enlist volunteers. But as the hours slipped by, agents also realized their chances for recovering her alive grew slim. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents and local law enforcement needed to scour miles of rugged terrain to find the girl before it was too late.
The small city of Lodi, California, is nestled in the heart of the Golden State's warm Central Valley, just south of Sacramento. It is surrounded by some of the world's richest farmland, orchards and renowned vineyards. Most who've settled here found Lodi's tranquility and low crime rate preferable to the frenzied pace of larger cities. On Saturday, July 2nd, 1994, 3 of its younger residents escaped the heat of the day in front of the television. A 16-year-old girl was watching her young sister and her sister's friend. The girl's parents were away in Michigan for the long 4th of July weekend. At about 4 p.m., a visitor stopped by. A shirtless man covered in tattoos was inquiring about the house, which was posted for sale. He asked if he could come in to check out the place.
You can call the number on
The teenager told him to call the realtor's number on the sign and to make an appointment when her parents returned in a few days. The man said he didn't have a pen and asked if he could come in to write it down. Wisely, the girl refused to let him in and offered to write it down for him instead. On a piece of her father's stationery, she jotted down the realtor's number. She handed it to the stranger, who left reluctantly.
I'm sorry.
No, come on.
Hi, I'd like to go on a carryout. A large half pepperoni.
Since it was getting close to dinner time, the older sister called to order a pizza.
Thanks, bye.
The closest takeout place was 10 minutes away.
Girls, I'm going to get a pizza. I'll be
The
back.
girls didn't want to leave their movie, so the teenager let them stay. She'd only be gone 20 minutes. Leaving the children alone for such a short time didn't seem too risky. Just moments after she left, the doorbell rang again.
Maybe your sister forgot her keys.
The young sister answered it.
Hi, I was here a little bit ago, a little earlier, and I talked.
The shirtless man had
Give me
returned.
your phone number, and I just want to know if I can borrow a phone book.
The girl went to fetch him a phone book from the kitchen. Moments later, the older sister returned home with the pizza. She called to the younger girls, but they did not answer.
Got pizza.
With a knife to her throat, the shirtless man attacked her. He forced the teenager upstairs to a bedroom where the younger girls were already tied up. Like the others, he secured her hands and feet. None of them knew what would happen next. Trembling, the young friend felt the intruder pull the knot from her ankles. Then he dragged her out of the room. In a second bedroom down the hall, the man threw his young victim onto the bed, threatening to kill her and her friends if she screamed. He bound her feet again. Then left the room. While alone, the young girl tried to work free from her restraints. For the sisters, their situation appeared hopeless. After a few grueling moments, the friend managed to free her hands. But the bindings around the friend's legs tripped her when she tried to stand up. She heard the man's footsteps and her friend's cries coming down the hall. The girl slipped into an open closet. Dragging the younger sister, the man burst into the room.
Stand up, stand up.
He didn't see the friend lying motionless in a recess on the closet's back wall. The tattooed man had no idea where the girl could have gone. Hearing no more movement, the girl's friend risked leaving the safety of her hiding place. The intruder likely figured the child had managed to escape and call the cops. Since he had lost control of one of his 3 hostages, he decided to focus on only one. The kidnapper forced the young sister into the family's car and sped off. The girl who had hidden in the closet found the older sister in the room next door and untied her. The teenager called 911 and reported that a tattooed man had abducted her sister, taking their red sports car. The information was relayed to Lodi officers who sped to the home. A quick response was essential, since the chances of finding an abducted minor alive greatly decrease after the first 24 hours. Lodi Police Chief Larry Ransom was called in right away to take charge of the case.
The agony of having your child taken is a fear of every parent. I think it's a fear of every community. You know, we want our children to be safe, and we particularly want them to be safe in our own homes. So it is the worst type of violation that can occur to have a child kidnapped out of a home.
Officers attempted to contact the girl's parents in Michigan, but they were not immediately reachable. Their parents were vacationing in a remote cabin, so Michigan deputies were sent to inform them of their daughter's abduction. The two girls left in the house were taken to a hospital for an examination before they could be interviewed. Police dispatched all points bulletins for the sports car's license plate and a description of the missing child.
My greatest fear was that this case was going to end up like so many others, that we would have a homicide. You try not to focus on that, but you recognize time is really of the essence. And that individual kidnapped that little girl for a specific reason, a reason that we were only speculating, but he knew in his mind and heart what he was going to do. And so we were just trying to do everything we could to recover her as quickly as possible and hopefully avoid that.
The chief wasted no time in calling in the FBI. Special Agent Charles Riley of the FBI Sacramento field office knew he had to act quickly if there was any hope of finding the young girl.
Sometimes the kidnappings go interstate and sometimes they don't. The problem is we don't know, and if you wait until you know there's an interstate nexus to the crime, sometimes it's pretty late in the game to get good information. So we generally jump early on a kidnapping.
By 8 p.m., more than an hour after the child was taken from her home, crime scene technicians from the FBI's evidence recovery team and the California Department of Justice processed the rooms where the girls had been held captive. For the next 12 hours, they collected hairs and fibers throughout the house. Technicians also dusted surfaces for fingerprints. They hoped that trace evidence left behind could help identify the unknown perpetrator. At the hospital, the missing girl's older sister and friend, though still shaken, told a Lodi detective they had never seen their attacker before. The girls described him as 5'7", tan, and muscular with many tattoos. They also provided detail of the terrifying events that had occurred just a few hours earlier. The younger girl said that she felt scared when her friend didn't respond to her calls after she'd left the room to answer the door. The girl found her in the kitchen with a man holding a knife to her throat. Instinctively, the girl tried to protect her friend. But the man was too powerful. He forced both girls out of the kitchen to the bedrooms upstairs, and then the older girl when she arrived moments later. The girls said he threatened to kill them if they didn't do as he demanded. They feared what he might have already done to the girl who he'd taken. As the only witnesses, they would need to give more detail to a sketch artist as soon as they were released from the hospital's care. For residents of Northern California, this crime was unfortunately all too familiar. Less than a year earlier, a 12-year-old Petaluma girl named Polly Klaas had also been kidnapped and was later found murdered.
Our case had such eerie similarities to the Polly Klaas case. There were 3 girls in the home in our case. There were 3 girls in the home of the Polly Klaas case. Both suspects were armed with a knife. Both suspects took a girl and left the home with them.
Though Polly Klaas's murderer was already behind bars, police hoped that the outcome of their current case would not prove as tragic. Lodi investigators called upon the Polly Klaas Foundation for help. Created after Polly's death, the foundation assists law enforcement with disseminating information on child abductions as quickly as it develops.
It was one of the first phone calls that I made. I contacted them because they have resources to assist in this type of investigation that we do not. They have their own network system. They have 24-hour gas stations and 24-hour convenient type stores that they will fax, copies of a flyer, and those will be posted so that if people are traveling through, they can be aware of this particular incident.
At the Lodi police station, the girls provided a description of the suspect to a sketch artist. As they had told police at the crime scene, each of the perpetrator's upper arms were covered in tattoos. And in the middle of his back, the man bore the unfinished outline of a skull's face. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, a mustache, and a scruffy beard.
Okay.
Investigators sent the sketch to every law enforcement agency and media outlet in the area. 20 miles away on a desolate road in the rural area of San Joaquin County, a rancher was on his way home at about 8:30 p.m. when he noticed a brush fire in one of his pastures. Just beyond, he saw a sports car, apparently abandoned, with its doors left open. He called 911. Firemen were first to arrive on the scene. The brush fire in the arid region of Northern California can spread quickly with devastating results. They were able to contain the blaze to an isolated area before it reached the red sports car. San Joaquin Sheriff's Lieutenant Mike Padilla arrived moments later.
We received a radio call that there was a fire, and it was a suspicious fire. Fire was on scene, and there was a vehicle abandoned in the area. When we saw the car, it did fit the description that was being aired on a Be on the Lookout by Lodi Police. It was very similar to that vehicle. When we finally got close enough to read the tags on the car, we called them in to our records division. They were able to confirm that was the vehicle.
The car had apparently sparked the fire as it careened through the rancher's field before it was halted by debris. But police found no signs of her or her abductor. They could only hope that they were close by and that the girl was still alive. By 8:30 p.m. on July 2nd, 1994, an hour and a half after a girl was abducted from her Lodi, California home in a stolen car, investigators had found the vehicle in a burning pasture of rural San Joaquin County. The girl and her kidnapper were nowhere to be found. San Joaquin Sheriff's Lieutenant Mike Padilla was joined by police from neighboring Lodi and the FBI.
The Lodi lieutenant arrived and met with us on the scene. It was at that point that we determined that there's a possibility that our victim might be in the luggage area of the vehicle. Although it's a small vehicle, it would be large enough to put a small female in.
The keys were missing, so firefighters carefully cut the hatchback's lock. They heard no banging or screaming and feared what they might find. The luggage compartment was empty. Though they found nothing in or near the vehicle to indicate the subject's present whereabouts, the car had become the nexus of the search, according to FBI Special Agent Charles Riley.
We didn't know whether the victim and the subject were close to the car or their location. We were acting upon the premise that they could still be very close. Our highest concern was to find the victim safely and also to find the subject if we could.
Since the area was so remote, it was unlikely that the assailant had stolen another vehicle and left the area. Yet because he was probably on foot, there was a greater possibility that he had disposed of his 12-year-old victim in order to move more swiftly through the rugged terrain. Lodi Police Lieutenant Gerald Murray was aware that the odds of finding her alive were beginning to dwindle.
Statistically, usually a victim does not live very long once they get in a rural setting and the suspect has control, and this, like it is in this type of situation. So, you know, we were very, very concerned about her living through this experience, and basically we had to focus on what we did know. And what we did know is we had the resources, we had the training, and we had the personnel that were going to diligently search and look for this person.
By 8:45 p.m., The FBI and local police had helicopters on the scene. From above, they would help guide investigators to the girl or her abductor if they were spotted. In order to penetrate the blackness of the landscape, the pilots relied on forward-looking infrared detection, or FLIR. FLIR is a sophisticated heat-sensing device that illuminates anything radiating heat, including people or the engine of a car. On the ground, canine units were called upon for assistance. Investigators hoped they could follow the subject's scents to indicate the direction they may have headed. The dogs led the searchers into the brush, but after about a mile, the trail turned cold. It didn't take long for San Joaquin Sheriff's Lieutenant Mike Padilla to realize that to cover such a wide rural expanse, they would need far more personnel.
Although we're a larger department than Lodi, this was even too broad of an area for us to handle alone. So we activated mutual aid, which is something we do in California. We can activate as many counties as we need to receive assistance. In this case, I believe we activated 10 counties, and the response was astounding.
The San Joaquin County Sheriffs also dispatched their mobile command center bus to help coordinate the massive search. The bus would act as the field headquarters to receive and disseminate the most current information and to pass out assignments for the interagency effort. It could be moved anywhere at a moment's notice if necessary. San Joaquin sheriffs and fire departments provided road and topographical maps of the entire region. Their familiarity with the area would be an invaluable resource to assist the FBI and Lodi police in containing 2 square miles, the maximum distance they could handle with limited personnel. Their first task was to set up a perimeter, as FBI Special Agent Charles Riley recalls.
We didn't know the time frame from when the car first arrived until we were there looking for the victim and the subject. So we tried to set up a perimeter on a spot we could function on. In this case, we chose roads circumventing the area where the car was found. And unfortunately, those roads were a great distance. It was in excess of a mile in every direction around the car, and we had to try and run a perimeter to make sure no one left that area.
California Highway Patrol units, San Joaquin Sheriff's deputies, and the Lodi police conducted rolling and stationary surveillance along major routes into and out of the area. The perimeter stretched like mile-long spokes of a wheel emanating from the abandoned car on the ranch. Several helicopters remained in the air, hoping to glimpse the young girl or the fugitive with their infrared radar. Within the perimeter, teams of searchers began to canvass the homes and ranches scattered amongst the hilly terrain. They considered the possibility that the suspect may know someone in the region. Agents and officers provided a description of the kidnapper and his victim and asked homeowners if they had seen anything unusual in the past hour. They found no one who had, and most were surprised to learn of the extensive manhunt.
With the assistance of deputies from the Calaveras County Sheriff's Department, we were able to assign them to do basically a property-to-property search to, first of all, search all the structures on that property. Second of all, account for all the vehicles, farm equipment, ATVs, that sort of thing. And also to inform the residents there of what was going on in the event that they would see the victim or suspect.
There were many outbuildings and barns located a short distance from the abandoned car. Landowners directed officers and agents to where they were located and allowed them to search every structure. Over the next 2 hours, dozens of teams found no trace of the tattooed man or the young girl. Because the area was vast, officers fastened yellow ribbons to structures at the front of the properties they had been to, so the next group would know that the location had been searched. But as thorough as the teams were, the uneven terrain favored the suspect.
As the teams would come back, would ask them, in the area that you searched, is it possible for someone to be hiding in there? And unfortunately, oftentimes they said it's possible. He would have to sit still sit quiet and sit hidden, but it's very possible.
By 11 p.m., over 4 hours since the girl had been taken from her home, searchers still had no way of knowing if the child was alive or dead, and no indication if she or her abductor were still in the area. Investigators hoped that alerting the public at large on the 11 o'clock news would prompt leads. Lodi Police Chief Larry Hansen held a press conference and faced questions from the community, including his own children.
I have 5 children. My youngest was 5 years old at the time, and she was aware that this kidnapping incident had occurred. And she saw me on television. She was talking to my wife, asking questions, you know, have they found the little girl? Have they found the little girl?
Unfortunately, the chief's wife had to tell their daughter that they had not. And as the hours increased from the time of her abduction, survival for the missing girl did not seem likely. By 5 a.m. on July 3rd, 1994, more than 10 hours had passed since a Lodi, California girl was abducted from her home. The FBI and a dozen local law enforcement agencies maintained a 2-square-mile perimeter in rural San Joaquin County, where they believed her kidnapper had fled with her the previous evening. Over 100 officials, including Lodi Police Lieutenant Gerald Murray, grappled with what to do next as they faced devastating uncertainty.
We were really concerned. I mean, do we even still have them in the area? Are we wasting our time here? Are they south of Highway 26 and we've missed them? You know, is he going to further victimize her? Is he going to commit a homicide? What's he going to do? Is he going to go to a house and abduct another victim or get another hostage? You have all these emotional things going on in your mind, and how can we best and humanly, prevent that?
As the search continued in the farming region, a team of Lodi police and FBI agents remained at the expanded command center in the Lodi library. They coordinated dozens of incoming officials and volunteers who wanted to assist. FBI Special Agent Charles Riley helped direct the search effort.
How old do you think she was?
Well, the search was organized, breaking everybody into small teams and then assigning the teams to sectors of the search. I think it was at least 4 or 5 persons per team, so they could spread out and cover an area. And we would assign areas, usually adjacent to each team, to we cover the area like patchwork. And then they would report back in the command post.
As soon as the sun came up, teams took advantage of the light. They began conducting linear grid searches of the vast farming region, hoping to find any sign that the girl or her unknown assailant were still in the area. FBI agent Charles Riley helped coordinate these meticulous searches.
We advised teams before they left that we could find things that would be evidence in the case. We could find clothing, we could find anything that might relate to it. One of the problems was we didn't know what things might and might not relate. So we didn't want to take a chance on bypassing anything that might be evidence, and told them anything they found that might be connected to the case, make sure they mark it, call it in.
By 11 that morning, searchers had covered all the territory down to the southwest perimeter established at Highway 26. They moved south of the highway to an area with even more places for someone to hide. There were fruit tree orchards, thick brush, and wide pastures. 8 dogs, horse patrols, and searchers on foot continued to scour the challenging terrain.
The area is becoming so expansive beyond the perimeter that the job of searching it would be much less thorough, and a chance of finding someone, particularly someone trying to hide from us, would be very difficult. And we weighed that against the fact that he may have escaped during the night, either through the large perimeter because it wasn't extremely tight, or was outside the perimeter before we even got it set up, and which would make the whole search for naught. Those two thoughts were pounding on us all day long.
Hoping for a lead, investigators canvassed the neighborhood in Lodi where the abduction had occurred 15 hours earlier.
Good afternoon. I'm Detective Reardon.
Since the suspect had approached the house on foot, perhaps he lived close by or had been hired by one of the neighbors to do yard work.
Okay. So a young fellow
They found no one who knew him,
Actually, come here a minute.
but several people did remember seeing the tattooed man. A young girl confirmed that she had spoken to the suspect about an hour before the abduction occurred. He had been walking through the neighborhood, targeting homes with for sale signs outside. Like he had at the victim's house, he said he was interested in buying and asked to come inside to take a look around. She refused and told him to call the realtor's number on the sign. But the scruffy man wasn't satisfied. As he continued to insist on coming in, the girl's father came in to see who his daughter was talking to. Startled, the would-be intruder quickly left the property. The daughter's description of the man exactly matched that of the other witnesses. It appeared that the drifter had been hunting for an opportunity to assault young girls, according to Lodi Police Chief Larry Hansen.
It's become a very difficult thing to realize that indeed there are people in our world who prey upon children, who abduct them, and who kill them, and that they're out there. They exist today as we are living our everyday lives. There are people who are plotting to steal someone's child. And it's a very frightening dose of reality to realize that that occurs.
In and around the community of Lodi, hundreds of volunteers posted flyers of the missing girl, which also included a sketch of her abductor. With the help of the Poly Class Foundation, they were able to saturate the area with over 20,000 flyers in a matter of hours. One of the leaflets finally hit home. A woman and her friend believed they recognized the sketch of the suspect. She immediately called police.
Is this the Lodi Police Department?
The woman told a detective that she thought the man in the composite may be her 25-year-old son, Stephen Reese Cochran.
About the little girl?
From the expanded command center in the Lodi Library, an officer dispatched investigators to her home to take a full statement.
Okay.
The woman's
Yes, ma'am.
address
I'm
was a
sending
short
officer right away.
distance from the missing girl's neighborhood.
Yes.
He, in fact, told his mother prior to this kidnapping incident that he had a fantasy of kidnapping a young girl, of having his way with her, and then of killing her. And so I believe that that was a strong possibility.
She said her son Stephen usually stayed at a shelter in town, but would sometimes take a bus to visit her. At about 3 o'clock on the day of the abduction, he had left her house, walking towards the neighborhood where the crime had occurred. He was wearing cut-off shorts and no shirt. The photo of her son the woman provided officers matched the sketch of the suspect. Stephen Reese Cochran had been in and out of jail for much of his 25 years. Less than 2 months earlier, Cochran had been released from an Arizona prison after assaulting an underage girl.
The FBI assisted us in getting a copy of Stephen Reese Cochran's fingerprints faxed to us. We had some good crime lab work from the Department of Justice. They had lifted fingerprints from inside the house. They compared them to the fingerprints of Mr. Cochran, and it was a perfect match.
Police immediately released his photo to the media to alert the public. At about noon, 17 hours into the pursuit, a citizen called police to tell them that he had spotted the fugitive in a store parking lot 25 miles from Lodi. There was a young girl with him who he was screaming at to get into a vehicle. Police needed to act fast if there was any hope of rescuing the girl before she disappeared once more. More than 17 hours after a 12-year-old girl was kidnapped from her home in Lodi, California, police received a report that she and her suspected abductor, Stephen Reese Cochran, had been seen in a store parking lot in the town of Manteca.
Driver!
When children are abducted by a stranger, their chances for survival dramatically decrease if they're not found in the first 24 hours.
Exit the vehicle slowly. Face forward. Face forward.
What's this all about?
Walk backwards until I tell you to stop.
The tattooed man resembled the suspect.
Get on your knees. Interlock your hands behind your head.
But his ID showed he was not Stephen Cochran. And the young girl was his daughter, not the child who had been kidnapped. The case of mistaken identity was one of many that added to the frustrations of Lodi Police Lieutenant Gerald Murray.
We had reports during the search of the suspect, which all turned out to be false sightings, but still they had to be investigated and looked into, which adds confusion to the whole process.
By now, over 400 officers and local volunteers had joined the search in San Joaquin County, where the kidnapper had abandoned the stolen vehicle 18 hours earlier. Still, they had found no signs, no clothing, not even a footprint from the suspect or the girl. It was clear that even if the fugitive had spared the girl's life, her condition was likely deteriorating in the heat of the Northern California summer, especially if she was tied up or injured.
You begin to, as time progresses, feel that obviously the worst is going to happen. Several conversations that I had with people that were there in the command post, we would sit down and discuss all these feelings and emotions and kind of bounce them off each other, I guess, for our own mental health. And always, when we concluded that, we came with like a second wind, we would call it, another rush of hope, another thing to do, another search to organize, another step to take to make it a good outcome.
At about 2 o'clock, a car approached officers stationed on a road within the 2-mile-wide perimeter. The local man had been so moved by TV news reports of the missing girl that he felt compelled to do what he could to help. He had taken it upon himself to drive up and down the area roads, scanning the fields for any sign of the suspect or the young girl. FBI Special Agent Charles Riley recalls that the residents' effort made a difference.
The searches were still ongoing, particularly in the area to the south, the area around the creek and the heavy foliage. Search was going on in that area when one of the cars going by on the road spotted a person out, and it was an area where we didn't have a team of searchers.
Just after the driver had left his residence, he spotted a filthy, shirtless man staggering through a distant pasture. The figure had blonde hair and was wearing cut-off jean shorts as described on the news. The witness was sure it was the suspect, but the young girl was nowhere in sight. Still, after 19 hours and hundreds of acres, it was the first hope searchers had that the fugitive was still in the area. One of the officers immediately radioed the command post to alert them to the suspect's location. A speedy response was essential to confine him before he got far. As agents and detectives called on all available personnel to converge, they received another call, this one from a fish and game officer.
A voice came over the radio and says, "Oh, we got a subject down here by the horse corrals, and it's this fish and game guy who uses plain English instead of radio code." So we all just kind of froze, kind of like deer in the headlights. Did I hear what I just heard? Did you say suspect or subject? I mean, subject could be anything. It could be somebody not even involved. Yeah, he sure looks like the guy, So we're all, your little antennas go up, goosebumps and everything. So an FBI agent, my sheriff's counterpart, and we hopped in a car and we went down there.
Those who were closest responded to the remote area where a lone windmill stood next to a feeding pen for livestock. With guns drawn, 3 officers took positions just beyond the wide pasture. They watched silently as the tattooed man emerged from the wilderness without the child.
They were able to converge and hide before the suspect crested a hill. The suspect appeared to be heading towards that area, probably dehydrated and assuming he could probably get water from that area.
The fugitive appeared exhausted, but police could not tell if he was still armed with a knife.
Please stop!
After almost 20 hours of pursuit, authorities finally had Stephen Reese Cochran in custody.
Behind your back.
The ex-convict claimed he didn't know why he was being arrested. He said he didn't remember anything about the past 24 hours, saying he was in a drug-induced haze. When investigators asked him where the girl was, he refused to answer. For Lodi Police Chief Larry Ransom, it was a moment filled with mixed emotions.
I was very relieved that we had our suspect into custody, but at the same time my heart dropped because our victim was not with him. And that just really concerned me that they weren't together. So I just didn't allow myself to get too caught up in the fact that we had him in custody. We still had a little girl to find.
Since Cochran refused to cooperate, the girl's location and her condition remained anyone's guess. But investigators would not rest until they recovered the young girl or her body. On July 3rd, 1994, 20 hours after the search for a kidnapped California girl had begun, the FBI and local authorities had arrested her suspected abductor, Stephen Reese Cochran. Cochran refused to say if the girl was dead or alive, or even if she was in the remote region where he had been captured. Though the child's odds of survival in the rugged terrain did not seem likely, Lodi Police Chief Larry Ransom tried to remain hopeful.
Most children that are abducted, we either never find them or we find them and they've been killed. And as this was unfolding, I was certainly aware of that. But again, we just tried to keep positive and focus all of our attention on the belief that we were going to be able to find her.
Authorities struggled with what to do next. 400 searchers, 10 dog teams, and 3 helicopters had been searching for her since daybreak, but failed to find even the smallest shred of evidence that the girl was close by. Lodi Police Lieutenant Gerald Murray weighed the possibilities.
At that particular time, we had basically 2 options. Attempt to follow the suspect's scent from where he was arrested back to the victim, or start a line search from the fenced area along Highway 26 and just walk north and hopefully run on to wherever the victim may have been.
A large group of volunteers had already assembled along the fence line near the pasture, waiting for the word to proceed. Agents and detectives were concerned that if they allowed such a large group to enter the field, the throng would likely trample evidence or might even walk past the small girl without seeing her. It was a critical moment, and like the eager searchers, FBI Special Agent Charles Riley felt the urgency.
You think about the families a lot, because everybody out there has a family, and you try to keep it professional, but it becomes part of you personally. And you relate, what if it's your sister, your daughter, and you always think those things.
Investigators decided that the best approach would be to use fresh dogs to trace Cochran's scent back from where he had approached the water trough. The problem was it would take the canine unit at least 30 minutes to get to the location. But the volunteers were not about to wait.
I noticed several civilians going over the fence into the crime scene area, and just as I began to send somebody down to have them ask them people to leave that area, I could hear sound and see the body language of people coming down the line from where these guys went over the fence. And there was obviously something happening, but at this particular point I couldn't distinguish what they were saying. And as the sound reached me, the crowd was saying, "There she is, there she is."
Like an apparition, a tiny figure appeared from behind the brush. Onlookers couldn't believe their eyes. The girl was alive, stumbling toward the sound of the jubilant searchers. The detective ordered officers out into the field to meet her.
When I first saw the victim coming over the hill, it was like an emotional dam had released. All the fears and worries and helplessness and hopelessness disappeared. And frankly, it took me about 10 minutes to get my composure and get back on track. People were high-fiving, hugging, shaking our hands, congratulating, crying. It's just amazing. This was really not just a law enforcement thing, but a community thing, and it really, really, really showed up at that moment, the emotion that was involved in it.
The girl was taken to the hospital where she was met by her distraught parents. On the following day, July 4th, despite her 22-hour ordeal, the girl felt strong enough to escort her father, a detective and the prosecutor, to the sites where Cochran had kept her hidden during the search. She explained that to avoid detection, Cochran had camouflaged her and himself with mud. He had also forced her to lie hidden, half submerged in the putrid water of a pond. It was too rank to drink, and she had nothing to eat for over 24 hours. Cochran kept moving, never staying in one place for very long.
Come on. Go.
The girl then showed the group another hiding place. At daybreak, she said they had hidden under some straw.
What happened?
During the time they were at that last hiding place, a sheriff's deputy who was on an ATV was going along a fence line no more than 30 feet from where they were located. The victim during that time, though, even under threat of bodily harm, attempted to stick her foot out of the grass area and get the attention of the deputy as he drove by, but she wasn't successful.
She said that at that location she fell asleep at some point. When she awoke, Cochran no longer had his knife.
Okay.
Several feet away, police located the weapon that he had repeatedly held to her throat. Cochran's thumbprint was later recovered from it.
We've got the weapon. Definitely.
After being found mentally competent to stand trial, Stephen Reese Cochran pled guilty to 23 counts, including kidnapping, assault, burglary, and car theft. In San Joaquin County Superior Court, he was sentenced to 106 years in prison for his crimes. Even Lodi Police Chief Larry Hanson's 5-year-old daughter understood the importance of this case.
When it was over and I was able to go home and then finally able to fall asleep, she came home later and was told that the little girl had been found. And she walks down the hallway, goes to my bedroom door, kisses the door and says, "Thank you, Daddy." And when I talk to officers at conferences, I make the point that if a 5-year-old girl can understand the impact of that type of a case, imagine the impact that it's going to have on your community.
The successful conclusion of the case in Lodi, California, together with the legacy of Polly Klaas and the Foundation for Missing Children, became the models by which child abduction cases across the country are now handled. With a quick response from citizens and officials alike, communities are learning how to increase the percentages for survival when one of their own goes missing. 13-year-old Amy McNeil had her whole life ahead of her. But when she was kidnapped on her way to school, Her future was in peril. The first call her terrified parents made was to the FBI. They hoped that the combined experience of agents and local law enforcement would flesh out the kidnappers before they took her life.
Wealth has its rewards, but it also brings its dangers. Kidnapping is one of them. No ordeal is more horrifying for a family than to have a child taken. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Kidnapping cases are among the most challenging for law enforcement, who often must remain out of sight, yet close at hand, ready to move in at a moment's notice.
About 20 miles south of Fort Worth, Texas, lies Alvarado, a small town in rural Johnson County. A few wealthy residents found Alvarado a safe haven away from the state's urban centers. The McNeils were among them. They lived as one of the area's most prominent families, partly from the return that Mr. McNeil made by selling an early design of the handheld calculator. At 7:15 a.m. on Friday, January 11th, 1985, they began their day having breakfast together, as was their usual routine.
Amy!
Afterwards, their teenage son would drive himself and his 13-year-old sister, Amy, to school.
Hi, darling. Please be careful out there today. Come on, come on, come on. Bye, Amy.
On the way, Amy and her brothers stopped to pick up their cousin as well. He and his family lived in a separate house on the McNeil estate. At about 7:45, they were finally on their way to class. Then, from behind an abandoned truck, a sedan pulled out across the road, forcing the teenagers' Jeep off to the side. A gunman jumped out of the car and approached the Jeep. He demanded that Amy get into the sedan. The blonde-haired man warned her brother not to contact the authorities. He would call the family in a short while with his demands. Instinctively, the teenager started to get out to help his sister.
Leave and go home, boy!
But the kidnappers threatened to kill him and his sister if he tried to follow them. As they raced off with the 13-year-old, the teenagers couldn't make out the license plate. In a matter of seconds, the girl was gone. They turned around and sped home. The boys told the McNeils what had happened and repeated the kidnappers' warning not to contact the authorities.
They pulled us over and they had guns. And if you told the police that they kill her.
Mr. McNeil ignored the demand and called the FBI field office in nearby Fort Worth.
Give me the FBI.
Former FBI Special Agent Clint Brown, a 30-year veteran, understood that when a kidnapping occurs, every second counts.
Hello, this is Clint Brown. I worked many kidnapping cases, and in not a single case did the subject get away with it. The number one goal in all cases like this is the safe return of the victim. All activities, all actions are all geared toward not doing anything to endanger the safety of the person who's been kidnapped.
The FBI's first task was to set up a recorder on the family's phone. By capturing the kidnapper's voice, they hoped to identify him or the place he was calling from. The FBI also informed the local phone company to be prepared to trace any incoming calls. Agents instructed the father on how to handle the call. He needed to insist on proof from the kidnappers that his daughter was still alive.
Expect a call to come in today.
So you probably want to look for a
The fact that they had worn no disguises disturbed former Johnson County Sheriff Eddie Boggs, who called in the Texas Rangers moments after he arrived.
How about that one over there?
The kidnappers hadn't tried to conceal who they were at all. They just, as we call it, they just barefaced them, just no mask, no disguises, anything. That means there's not going to be a victim around telling who they are, what they look like. They're going to kill them.
What is this?
Uncovering the kidnappers' identities might prevent that. Using an identikit that included hundreds of facial features, investigators worked with Amy's brother and cousin, building a composite of the man who held the shotgun. The teenagers had never seen the man with the stringy blonde hair before. They also provided a description of the kidnapper's car.
It seems like the people who engage in this are people of questionable and limited mental capacity, and very often they have, I guess what you might say, delusions based on drug use. Very often, you know, the need to get money to promote their drug habits or what drives them, and so we have that being a motive for the kidnappings very much, and that certainly impairs their ability to think or plan or pull this off successfully.
At 10 a.m., over 2 hours after Amy had been abducted, the phone finally rang.
Hello?
It was one of her kidnappers.
Yeah?
Did your son tell you I had your daughter?
The man demanded a $100,000 ransom.
Yeah?
Half was to be in $100 bills, the other half in smaller denominations. None of it could be sequenced. As instructed, Amy's father pleaded to speak to his daughter, but the kidnapper refused. Her captor insisted Amy was still alive and that her father could speak to her. When the man called back to say where to drop the ransom, he added that if the family called the FBI, they would never see Amy again. The call lasted less than a minute, not long enough to establish a trace for the technology of 1985. Agents played back the recording, listening for any background noise that might reveal the location. They figured the call was likely made from a payphone since they could hear wind and traffic noise. But they heard nothing more specific.
Yes, sir.
And no one in the family recognized the kidnapper's voice. Though Amy's family was wealthy, her father did not have $100,000 in cash available since most of his assets were tied up in investments. He called his associates to fly in on chartered planes with whatever cash they were able to withdraw. The next call they received was not the one retired Sheriff Eddie Boggs had hoped for. The press had learned of the kidnapping from one of McNeil's neighbors.
I got a call from my chief deputy, and he said that he has all sorts of media representatives out there wanting a story. They knew that there had been a kidnapping, there had been a ransom demand. They demanded to talk to somebody about the story and that they were going to go on the air with it.
If the kidnappers discovered that law enforcement was involved, they would likely dispose of Amy before the ransom was delivered. Investigators discussed what they should do next as precious minutes ticked by. The FBI instructed the family and the Johnson County Sheriff on how to proceed.
And the FBI said, well, here's what you do. You have your chief deputy call each one of the reporters in, ask him for his ID, ask him who is the very top man at his station that he can talk to, and then tell that top man, we're not going to confirm whether or not you have a story, but if you do have a story and you run it, you could possibly cost the life of a little girl.
Every local press agency agreed not to run the story until notified by the sheriff. Just before 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the phone rang again.
Hello? Yeah, I'm the guy who got your daughter.
It was the same man who had called earlier. On a separate line, an agent contacted the chief of security at the local phone company, who was standing by, hoping to trace the call.
Yeah.
He trapped the number
Yeah,
and began to
right
track
there.
its origin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mr. McNeil begged the kidnapper to let him hear his daughter's voice.
Calm down.
This time, the man allowed the frightened girl to speak to her father.
Daddy?
Her eyes concealed to prevent her from knowing where she was.
You haven't hurt me.
Be my girl.
He could hear her crying. Despite his own fear, he reassured Amy that everything would be okay and that she would soon be home. That's when the man grabbed the phone. The kidnapper said that he had not yet secured a location for the ransom to be dropped.
What do you mean you're having trouble getting a drop zone?
Again, he promised to call back later.
Hello?
The room fell silent as former Texas Ranger Bill Gunn recalls.
It was very heartrending to listen to it. She was frightened, and of course Mr. McNeil was frightened. The conversation was very short. Mr. McNeil encouraged her to keep her upper lip up and remember who she was. And that was the end of the conversation.
They hoped the trace would be successful.
That's the hardest part, correct?
The security chief reported that the call had originated from outside the phone company's calling area. And since the call had been terminated, it would be impossible to trace it through the neighboring system. The phone company was able to determine that the call was made from somewhere in the town of Kennedale, 25 miles north of the McNeil's estate.
Good.
Amy was still in Texas, close to Fort Worth.
Kennedale? Okay, sounds like...
But without a specific location, investigators had little to go on.
You know she's in Texas. Yeah.
We had no idea, no evidence, no leads, nowhere to go. The only thing we had was the description of a car. I did have my troops, what few I had, to go out and start in a perimeter and expanding the perimeter, checking every farm, every house, every housing addition, everywhere they could for a car that matched the description that we had.
Johnson County deputies fanned out over a 30-mile radius from Alvarado up to Kennedale, searching for the kidnapper's car. They also alerted other local officers to be on the lookout for the four-door sedan. Yet without a license plate, it was not likely they'd locate the vehicle among the rural expanse. Almost 6 hours after 13-year-old Amy McNeil had been abducted, her father's friends from Texas and Arkansas had begun to arrive in Alvarado, carrying tens of thousands in cash. Texas Rangers escorted them from a small airport to a local bank where the currency would be processed before it was paid to the kidnappers. Wearing latex gloves, Rangers recorded and bundled the $100,000 ransom. They assembled half of it in $100 bills as the kidnapper had instructed. Another $50,000 was compiled from smaller denominations. Retired Texas Ranger Sergeant John Dendy helped direct the processing.
They had quite a time raising that amount of money on such short notice. But after they got the money, then the Rangers that were at the bank started to getting clean bags to put it in. In other words, no fingerprints, plastic bags, and made copies of the bills, so we'd have the serial numbers on each bill. Everything was loaded up, and then all we had to do then was sit and wait until more demands came in.
In the late afternoon, deputies had located a car that fit the description of the kidnapper's vehicle, parked 20 miles from the McNeil's estate. A license plate check revealed that the sedan had been stolen the day before from Mesquite, Texas, 50 miles east of Alvarado. Inside, deputies found no obvious signs of Amy or her abductors. They impounded the car and continued to canvass the area for witnesses who may have seen the driver. At the Johnson County Sheriff's Department, the FBI processed the sedan for forensic evidence. From the interior, they removed several sets of fingerprints. But without a suspect's prints to compare them to, the recovered prints could not help identify Amy's captors or their current whereabouts. By 11:30 p.m., 16 hours after Amy had been taken, her family had received 3 more phone calls, but still had not been told where the ransom was to be dropped. They hoped this would be the call that could secure Amy's release.
Hello?
It was the same man who had called earlier.
Yeah?
Once again, the phone company initiated a trace.
Yeah, I'm working on it right now.
Amy's father told the kidnapper that he had the $100,000 prepared as the man had requested.
No, I don't want to do this tomorrow.
But the caller said that it was too late. The ransom drop he had in mind was at least 200 miles away from Alvarado.
The gas station?
No.
By the time Mr. McNeil reached the location, it would be light, too risky for the kidnapper to take a chance on being seen.
No, I don't.
The father pleaded to make the exchange tonight.
No, I can't wait till tomorrow.
The man refused. He said he'd call back tomorrow to make the arrangements.
We didn't think they would let us have her back alive, you know, in good shape. We had no idea what they'd done to her in this period of time that they'd had her.
Agents waited for word to see if the trace had been successful.
Yeah. No, it wasn't long enough.
It had not.
No. Couldn't get a trace.
Once again, the phone company had failed to secure the kidnapper's location.
All right, thanks.
Investigators could only hope that 13-year-old Amy McNeil would survive the night and eventually be reunited with her parents. By 5 p.m. on Saturday, January 12, 1985, a day and a half had passed since 13-year-old Amy McNeil had been kidnapped on her way to school in Alvarado, Texas. One of several unidentified kidnappers had called Amy's wealthy family 7 times. He demanded $100,000 in unsequenced currency, but had not told the McNeils where to drop the ransom. Though the kidnapper had also warned Amy's family not to call the FBI, Mr. McNeil had done so and was joined by several agents, a dozen Texas Rangers, and the Johnson County Sheriff's Department. Her abductors had promised to call again at 5 p.m. with the location of the ransom exchange and to confirm that Amy remained unharmed. Despite the agonizing wait, former Special Agent Clint Brown and his team wasted no time in preparing.
When the instructions were anticipated, a plan was devised to deliver the ransom money with Mr. McNeil driving the car and carrying the money himself for delivery so that anybody would see the car. It was the limousine that he had. They would assume he was in the car by himself. Actually concealed in the car would be 2 FBI agents.
The agents also outfitted Mr. McNeil with a mini cassette device to record any conversations he may have with the kidnappers if they should approach his limousine. The interior of the car would be wired as well, and the 2 concealed agents would be heavily armed. At 5:10 p.m., the kidnapper called again. He told Mr. McNeil to drive 40 miles alone in his limousine from Alvarado on Interstate 30 to East Dallas and take exit 51. There he would find a gas station. The father was to be there by 7 p.m. in order to receive further instructions on the payphone by the vending machine. Mr. McNeil spoke to Amy briefly before her abductor disconnected. She was scared, but unharmed. The call was too brief to be traced. As planned, a contingent of FBI, Texas Rangers, and Johnson County personnel would follow McNeil's car at a distance. The team would be fully equipped, as retired Texas Ranger Bill Gunn remembers.
We got all of the assets available, tracking devices, aircraft. We had a tracking device on Mr. McNeil's car, so that if we lost contact with it on the ground, both aircraft could receive it.
Amy's father promised his wife that he wouldn't come home without their daughter. He was fitted with body armor and provided with a sidearm in the event the kidnappers attacked him. The two agents with him would be armed with shotguns and semi-automatic pistols. They checked their radios to make sure they could be heard by the follow team.
You guys okay back there? Check 1, check 2.
Retired FBI Special Agent Rod Kicklighter was assigned to ride in the limousine and advise the concerned father.
I recall one of our main instructions to him was not to let himself be taken hostage. And we talked through that quite a bit. He was to deliver the money, and we would then take over, try to effect the arrest, but he was in no way to get involved himself.
McNeil got the go-ahead to leave for the gas station in East Dallas, 40 miles away. When the limo had reached about a mile, the agent instructed the others to follow. Since the kidnapper had provided a specific route to the Dallas gas station, former Ranger Sergeant John Dendy and the others feared that the kidnappers could be surveilling the limousine as it traveled.
We had no idea where they would be, who they were, what they were in, or anything about them. And in order for them not to become suspicious of any of us, we kept a good distance behind the car.
As the stretch crossed county lines, the Rangers radioed ahead to local authorities. They informed traffic patrols not to stop the speeding unmarked cars and provided license plates for their vehicles. Several units raced ahead to set up surveillance of the service station in East Dallas. While most maintained an outside perimeter, one team held a distant view of the payphone. They stood by, ready to act, in the event that the kidnappers revealed themselves or their 13-year-old hostage. Agents reported that the limousine had just reached exit 51. The phone had begun ringing at exactly 7 p.m. when Amy's father rolled into the service station.
What? Okay, hold on.
It was the 8th call he had received from his daughter's kidnappers over the past 34 hours. The man did not give the father the news he had hoped for. He told Mr. McNeil to take Interstate 20 east to Tyler, Texas, almost 100 miles from Dallas. At the US 69 exit, he would find another gas station, where he'd receive another call at 9:20 on the payphone outside. For retired Special Agent Clint Brown, it was difficult to predict what Amy's abductors might be planning.
We could tell the kidnappers were not very well organized. They seemed somewhat ill at ease, confused. Some of their plans seemed to change. They didn't seem to have a clear idea of where the money was to be delivered, and so they even appeared to be stalling at times, trying to formulate a workable plan that they thought they could use. So it did not appear that they had thought this out very well at all.
At the second gas station in Tyler, Amy's father was directed to drive to a third one in Longview, 40 miles further east, by 11 p.m. From there, he was ordered to drive 60 more miles north to a fourth gas station in Mount Pleasant, Texas. Precisely at midnight, he'd receive another call at the payphone outside. By now, investigators had covered over 180 miles, traveling for well over 5.5 hours. They hadn't anticipated the long trip, and 2 surveillance aircraft were forced to turn back to refuel in Dallas. Despite their frustrations, the team was determined to outlast the kidnappers.
We had no idea what they were going to do next. They just kept running us over East Texas. We saw a large portion of East Texas, and we didn't know when it was going to stop. But we knew that we were there for the duration.
But the situation was only getting worse. About halfway to the Mount Pleasant gas station, the limousine began losing power. After racing at speeds in excess of 100 miles an hour for extended periods, the engine simply quit. Agent Kicklighter feared that the mechanical problem would jeopardize any chance they may have still had to rescue the 13-year-old.
We're all getting a little tense and excited and worried that we're not going to get to the drop site and that we're not going to be able to get Amy back.
Dozens of miles away, at the gas station in Mount Pleasant, 2 camouflaged Texas Ranger snipers had been deployed to surveil the payphone. At midnight, it began to ring. Mr. McNeil was the only one who could answer. But he missed the call. At midnight on January 13th, 1985, just outside Mount Pleasant, Texas, 2 FBI agents and the wealthy father of a kidnapped 13-year-old girl worked frantically to repair a limousine's engine. Mr. McNeil's limousine was the car his daughter's kidnappers expected him to be driving alone to a Mount Pleasant gas station payphone by midnight. As Mr. McNeil tried to restart his car, 2 camouflaged Texas Ranger snipers, deployed to surveil the gas station, watched helplessly as the phone began ringing. Mr. McNeil was the only one who could answer, but he missed the call for the final location of the $100,000 ransom exchange. Patrolling the desolate roads around the gas station in Mount Pleasant, the support team was informed that Mr. McNeil had finally found his car's difficulty, according to former FBI Special Agent Clint Brown.
The car that Mr. McNeil was riding in began to develop electrical problems. Apparently the alternator wasn't keeping the battery charged up, and so as time went on, the lights began to dim and he began to have trouble with the electrical system of the car.
The communications and tracking devices wired to the limo system had drained its power over the past 7 hours. Disconnecting several instruments provided enough juice to get the engine started again. Though the headlights were inoperable, the car would move forward. Mr. McNeil and the 2 agents pressed on without full power and limited visibility. Their path was lit by an aircraft overhead. The remaining FBI agents, Texas Rangers, and Johnson County personnel gathered at a separate filling station a short distance from where the kidnappers had planned to call. They debated what to do next, since Mr. McNeil had missed the midnight appointment, and they had no way of contacting the kidnappers. With few options, investigators decided to send the limousine to the Mount Pleasant gas station late, figuring that the kidnappers would probably call again.
We were pretty well counting on the fact that they were going to show up or call, that they were desperate for the money. We reassured them we had the money, and we certainly reassured them we wanted Amy back. So we thought that they would stay connected to follow through with a payoff site.
At approximately 1 a.m., Mr. McNeil and the FBI agents arrived at the Mount Pleasant gas station in the troubled limousine. Almost 8 hours and 200 miles after they had first departed Alvarado, the limousine's engine gave out for good. The vehicle wasn't going anywhere without major repair. They could do nothing more but wait in the chilly night and pray that the kidnappers would contact them.
Due to the fact that we had to drive very slowly in the limousine, we were late getting to the drop site, approximately an hour. We were somewhat concerned about that, but we set up to wait by the drop site.
Texas Rangers kept watch, remaining hidden in the field across from the gas station. The fate of 13-year-old Amy McNeil remained unknown. Then, at 1:15 in the morning, the payphone started ringing. As investigators had suspected, one of the kidnappers called back, eager to get the ransom. He claimed that Amy was still alive, but refused to let her speak. Worst still, former Texas Ranger Bill Gunn and his team learned that the assailants had likely spotted the heavy presence of law enforcement on the desolate roads.
They started out telling him that he had brought the police with him, and they were very unhappy with that. So they finally told him to bring the money to a motel in Mount Pleasant. And at that time, he informed the man, the kidnapper, that he could not move the vehicle again. It was dead. And the man told him on the phone then, they said, well, we're coming after the money, and we've got plenty of guns, and there better not be any police officers around.
The father remained resolute, despite his fear of what the kidnappers may have already done to his daughter. He grabbed the ransom bag and stood outside so his daughter's captors could see him as they approached. Agents hidden in the limousine readied themselves for an armed confrontation. Retired Special Agent Kicklighter realized a mistake now could cost lives.
The exchange of a ransom during a kidnapping is always one of the most critical elements of the investigation. In this case, you don't want someone else to be hurt or taken hostage and be another victim of a kidnapping.
Hours passed in the cold January night. The Rangers stayed alert, protecting against an ambush. On the road circling the gas station, investigators saw no sign of vehicles approaching the ransom drop.
See anything out here?
By 3 in the morning, 2 hours after the kidnappers had called, it looked as if they weren't going to show. The Texas Rangers, Johnson County deputies, and the FBI considered what their next move should be.
It was decided that they were not going to come, and so the whole surveillance and monitoring situation was called off in anticipation we're going to have to start again the next day on Sunday.
Agents in the limo received word of the decision to regroup until daybreak. Mr. McNeil insisted they stay. But investigators convinced him that at present, there was nothing more they could do for his daughter.
Money, if nothing else, right?
Mr. McNeil was upset that yet another night was going to pass without a resolution to getting his daughter back. He had done everything that they had told him to do, so there was a great deal of disappointment.
A car came by to pick up McNeil and the agents. They headed back to the nearby gas station where others had begun to assemble. The two Rangers, hiding in the field for the past 3 hours, moved toward the street where the sheriff was to meet them in a separate van. As they approached, an unidentified vehicle cruised by their position. It was filled with a group of men and a young girl who headed towards the interstate.
Buick southbound.
The Rangers called for units.
Location. Need somebody to pick them up.
As they watched those believed to be the kidnappers speed off into the cold Texas night. 3:45 a.m. on January 13th, 1985, 2 Texas Rangers believed they had spotted the kidnappers of 13-year-old Amy McNeil racing away from the Ransom drop point in Mount Pleasant, Texas.
Can you copy me? Command post, copy.
They alerted all available units in the area.
High rate of speed.
En route to collect the Rangers, the Johnson County Sheriff heard their call and saw the suspicious vehicle on the highway. He gave chase, but the sedan easily pulled away from the lumbering van that former Sheriff Eddie Boggs was driving.
My van being as slow as it was, they outran me like I was standing still. There wasn't any way I could keep up even within sight of what was going on, because that chase was going over 100 miles an hour. And it was unbelievable.
Despite his best efforts, the sheriff lost the car and returned to the makeshift command post to provide a detailed account.
Been having trouble reaching you on the radio.
Amy's life was now in even greater jeopardy since there was no question the kidnappers knew law enforcement was in the area. Then a call came in from their remaining aircraft.
We've got someone down Interstate 30, Rangers.
The pilot had spotted the vehicle, and investigators still on the road had resumed the chase. Former Texas Ranger Bill Gunn recalls that the suspects were speeding west on Interstate 30.
But at that time, the rest of us had gotten involved, and we were in pursuit of the vehicle. And we continued at a high-speed chase down Interstate 30, which would have been a direction going toward Dallas, and to a small community in another county.
10 minutes later, Texas Rangers, sheriff deputies, and the FBI fell into line. The suspects refused to slow down. As the lead ranger began to close in, he was fired upon. A shotgun and pistol pelted his car with rounds. As he prepared to return fire, he glimpsed 2 girls in the back seat. One was young Amy McNeil, who they were forcing into the back window.
The people who were responsible for this started firing guns at them out the back windows on each side of the Buick. They would push Amy up into the back glass where she could be seen, and of course we couldn't return any fire.
Construction narrowed the interstate to 1 lane, but the suspects did not slow. Shots hit the grill of the lead car. Slugs pierced the carburetor, forcing the Ranger to stop. The chase continued at high speeds through 3 Texas counties before the suspects exited into the small town of Saltillo, Texas.
Dispatch, looks like we're slowing down.
Unexpectedly, at about 4 a.m., they stopped on the front lawn of a home and several fled on foot. They opened fire on investigators. 2 gunmen barricaded themselves behind a van parked in the driveway, while a third disappeared behind the house. None of the officers on the scene were wearing body armor.
When I first got out of the car, I could see this man standing in front of the van. Now, this is Sunday morning at 4 o'clock, and no moon as far as I can remember. And every time he'd pull off around with that 12 gauge, he'd line up the world.
Investigators took cover behind their vehicles and pinned the gunman down. The suspect's abandoned car was in the direct line of fire. Amy was trapped inside without any means of escape. One assailant attempted to break into the home of an elderly resident. She took cover, not knowing what was happening a few feet from where she had slept. As the firefight raged on, investigators knew that they had to somehow get to Amy McNeil before it was too late. At 4 a.m. on January 13th, 1985, the FBI, Texas Rangers, and Johnson County sheriffs exchanged gunfire with the kidnappers of 13-year-old Amy McNeil. After being held for almost 2 days, Amy remained trapped inside her captor's vehicle with a female assailant on the front lawn of a farmhouse in Saltillo, Texas. Ranger Sergeant John Dendy was one of several who braved the hail of bullets.
I could see one of them behind the front wheel of the car, and that's what I was mainly shooting at. I didn't have any other place to go. And the only thing I knew to do is shut them down. And the only way I'm going to do that is to hit one of them.
Several miles away in another vehicle, Amy's wealthy father was accompanied by the Johnson County Sheriff and an FBI agent on their way to the scene. They could do nothing more but hope and pray that the 13-year-old would survive the battle.
Locally here, go ahead.
As the shooting continued, a Johnson County Sheriff's deputy moved towards the suspect's car, as Ranger Bill Gunn recalls.
One deputy sheriff ran from the vehicle that he arrived in over to the kidnapper's vehicle, and she asked him if he was a police officer, and he said, "Yes, ma'am," and she just really grabbed hold of him then and hung on.
The deputy handed the frightened girl to a ranger who took her out of harm's way. They ran back to the road where more backup arrived. After 44 hours in captivity, 13-year-old Amy McNeil was finally safe. The ranger needed to contact the other investigators and to tell her father the good news. Retired FBI Special Agent Rod Kicklighter was in the vehicle as the ranger's call came through.
It seemed like hours before we finally got the confirmation that Amy was safe. I recall Mr. McNeil beating me about the head and shoulders about Amy being safe and they've got her, and he was ecstatic, as were we all.
Hold your fire! Hold your fire!
While Amy was headed to meet her father, the shooting had subsided. The gunmen had both been wounded. Investigators held their weapons on them, not sure if the suspect still had ammunition. Then, out of the shadows, a third gunman emerged.
Freeze! Get out! Get on your knees! Get on your knees! Drop your weapon!
Realizing that escape was impossible, he surrendered. From inside the kidnapper's car, investigators cuffed the female suspect and a fourth man who had remained there during the shootout. Rangers confirmed with Amy that all the kidnappers were now in custody. On a deserted highway a mile away, Amy ran towards the waiting van that held Mr. McNeil.
Dad! Dad!
Former Special Agent Clint Brown watched the reunion between father and daughter.
Everybody was pretty emotional. You know, we all had kids and daughters and such, so we were pretty emotional just watching that reunion, and everyone was so happy that it had turned out so well that we all shared in that excitement and joy of her being recovered safely.
No one but the suspects had been hit by gunfire. Both were ex-convicts and high on methamphetamine at the time of the shooting. The elderly resident was also examined. She had survived the ordeal with only frayed nerves. A license plate check on the kidnapper's car revealed that it had been stolen in Dallas the day before. Investigators also figured out why the suspects had stopped their vehicle when they had.
We never could understand why they turned in at this particular house, but we found out later they'd run out of gasoline.
34-year-old James Foote, who had made the initial ransom calls, had previously worked for Mr. McNeil and had hatched the plan to kidnap Amy. For using a weapon in the commission of the crime, he was convicted of aggravated kidnapping and attempted murder and was sentenced to life in prison. 27-year-old Michael Mills, who had made the remaining calls, was likewise convicted of aggravated kidnapping and attempted murder, receiving life. The other assailants, 21-year-old Daniel Neckar Jr. and 21-year-old Thomas Barnes, were convicted of the same charges and also sentenced to life. The 18-year-old woman who was with them was charged as the men were. She had only met James Foote a few days earlier before the kidnapping had occurred. The woman was scared when the men brought the 13-year-old into the house, but stayed to prevent Amy from being abused by them. Amy later confirmed that the 18-year-old had protected her, according to retired Johnson County Sheriff Eddie Boggs.
She was only given a 10-year probated sentence per Amy's request. The female accomplice really didn't know what she was getting into at the time whenever she joined them, because they had already been using dope for several days steady before she got involved in it. And it was just she got involved in something she couldn't get out of.
6 months later, on July 4th, 1985, Foote was transferred from the state penitentiary to the Johnson County Jail to face additional charges. Authorities had traced the weapons he used in the kidnapping to the armed home invasion of a Dallas man. Foote was also indicted in Arlington, where he had attempted to kidnap the child of a wealthy developer days before he took Amy. Outside, in the blistering Texas summer, the prison guard agreed to retrieve a water hose to cool down the inmates. When he left, Foote climbed over the 8-foot fence. He made it under the barbed wire. Seconds later, the kidnapper disappeared into the nearby woods. That evening, the Johnson County Sheriff faced the difficult task of informing Mr. McNeil that his daughter's kidnapper had escaped to where no one knew. Deputies would be stationed outside the McNeil home as long as Foote remained at large, fearing that the convict might seek vengeance on the family. Mr. McNeil immediately offered a reward for any information leading to Foote's recapture. A few days later, a call came in to Sheriff Boggs that seemed promising.
James Foote had a cousin that lived up close to Paris, Texas, that called in and said that he knew where he was and had been in contact with him. And that cousin also had some criminal charges pending on him and was willing to make a deal.
Okay, guys, we're going to be entering.
Foote had been hiding in the cousin's Paris, Texas home, 170 miles northwest of the prison.
Gain access to the property.
Johnson County deputies prepared for the assault of the single-story dwelling.
Over here. This is your living room area.
They readied themselves for another armed confrontation. As promised, the cousin made certain that Foote was inside at home for the arrest to take place.
Deputy Sheriff, freeze! Get your hands up and your
This
hands.
time, there would be no shootout. Sheriff deputies captured Foote without incident. He was returned to prison, where Foote will spend the rest of his life. At the state capitol in Austin, Texas, retired Ranger Sergeant John Dendy was among those who received commendation and recognition for the successful conclusion to the case.
Going to Austin, talking to the governor, getting a commendation. The fact that I knew that I had had something to do with saving this beautiful little girl's life was worth more than anything else they could do. That made everything worthwhile. All the 36 years that I spent in law enforcement, that was the top.
Because law enforcement responded quickly and did not relent, Amy McNeil was reunited with her family and friends, thankful for the determined officers and agents who answered the call.